Hi everyone, I'm Chyill and welcome back to another detailed champion guide. Today I'll be talking about the newly added melee champion in Battlerite, Raigon, the Exiled Prince. And so sit back, relax and enjoy the show. Raigon is an aggressive melee champion who primarily deals considerable burst damage with combos. By that I mean stringing together his abilities one after another to deal damage quickly. He is very fun to play and has quickly taken my number 2 spot for favourite champion, if not my favourite champion in Battlerite. It's quite hard to decide between him and Paloma. Either way, he's still a ton of fun, and with the recent buffs to some of his Battlerites and abilities, I think he's in a pretty good spot as a champion. He has a decent amount of self-sustain, maybe not Raigon level of self-sustain for a melee champion, but still good enough to keep him in the fight when he needs to be. In terms of control, he has some good options for that, and this allows him to almost pick and choose his little fights quite well. And this is usually quite important for melee champions after all, since you don't usually want to be among too many enemies who can freely do whatever they want as a melee champion. You get killed so fast, and Raigon is no exception. Despite the game saying that he is a beginner-friendly champion, I think it is not entirely true. There are aspects of him which is easy, like it is clear what he should try to do to survive or do damage, etc. But it's not very clear how he should do it effectively, I feel. And so, before we start getting into the meat of the guide, just like the other champion guides I have made previously for Lucy and Ismo, to name a few, I have split this guide up into different sections, and I have included timestamps directly to each section in the description below. As usual, feel free to skip ahead to the section that you need if you've already watched the video before. And again, we'll start the guide off with looking at Raigon's abilities, before talking about his playstyle, strengths and weaknesses. Then we'll look at his Battlerites options, and finally we finish off with some of my gameplay tips and potential combos when using Raigon. And so without further ado, let's begin. First off, let us go through and talk about his abilities one by one. Raigon's mouse 1 or left click ability is Sword Slash, and it is basically his basic attack. It deals 10 damage and each successful hit gives you a weapon charge, in addition to lowering the cooldown of your mouse 2 or right click ability. The weapon charges also directly affect your mouse 2 ability, so we'll get to that soon. Note that the swing animation of the ability looks like the attack could hit multiple enemies. It in fact does not, and it only hits one person at a time. Moving on, Raigon's mouse 2 or right click ability is Retribution. Basically what it does is Raigon will charge forward up until he reaches the maximum charge distance or until he hits an enemy, and thus a slash. Enemies caught in the slash will be damaged, and Raigon will be healed for a little bit for each enemy hit. This damage and heal depends on the amount of weapon charges, and so more charges means more damage and more heals. Very simple. The main target will get hit for more damage than enemies at the side, but even so you should definitely try to hit more than one enemies if you can, since there's no reason not to try for that. More overall team damage and more healing for you. Those are always good. A good thing to note about the ability is its cooldown. Remember that the cooldown of this ability is reduced for each successful hit of your mouse 1 ability, and so if you have just recently used your mouse 2 ability and it is on cooldown, 3 mouse 1 hits should make it so that your mouse 2 ability is ready to be used again, assuming there are no pauses in between attacks. Next up, Raigon's spacebar ability is Heavenly Strike, and the ability basically allows Raigon to jump and deal damage in a straight line in front of him at the landing location. Raigon should be invulnerable as well while jumping, making this a pretty effective escape tool in certain situations. When trying to use the ability for damage, bear in mind that there is a minimum jump distance, so you need to be at least a certain distance away to have a good chance of hitting the enemy with this ability. Raigon's Chyill ability is an interesting one. It is called Parry, and it basically lets Raigon have this protective barrier that can deflect up to 5 attacks for a short duration. Melee attackers will suffer some counter-attack damage, and projectiles are redirected. Both the melee and ranged attacks will be deflected toward your aim direction, and so you'll need to aim toward your enemy too, even if you're just deflecting melee attacks. Just like other counter-type abilities from other champions, this ability doesn't block AoE abilities, so do be careful about that. Don't forget you can always cancel the parry ability halfway with the C button by default should you wish to cancel it early. Moving on, Raigon's E ability is Seismic Shock, and basically what it does is that Raigon will shoot out a long-range projectile, and the enemy that it hits will be knocked up in the air for some time. During this time, they are invulnerable, and so this ability is a bit like a stun, but you can't damage them while they are stunned. What you can do though is to time your abilities so that you can damage them just as they land, before they can even react to it with an escape ability or something. Otherwise, you can also use it to just keep an enemy out of the fight for a short while and focus down the other enemy. Certainly a very strong ability, just be careful of its long cast time and predictable nature. You might want to cancel it mid-cast once in a while to play mind games with your enemy, and that is always fun, I guess. And so those were all of Raigon's abilities that doesn't require energy. Now let us talk about his abilities that do require energy. First off, Raigon's R ability is Dragon Palm. Dragon Palm basically lets you dash forward and knock an enemy back while dealing a bit of damage to them. If the enemy is knocked into a wall, the enemy will be stunned for a short while. While it may seem like it may be hard to stun enemies with this sometimes, the knockback range is actually quite far, so as long as you time it right and aim it right, most of the time you will be able to stun the enemy. Stunning enemies this way will usually open them up to be comboed and focused down pretty quickly, since not only are they stunned, but they are also against the wall too, and this makes it hard for them to escape or avoid abilities directed at them. Moving on, Raigon's first EX ability is Slicing Winds. This ability is his shift left click ability, and it basically lets you infuse your blade, making it so that your next 2 mouse 1 clicks shoot forth a rather short range projectile that can deal damage to multiple enemies and also heal you if it hits enemies. Pretty handy in most situations, I would say. And so, if you find that you have spare energy, this ability might be an option. Be careful for the charge limit of 3 though, so you might want to cast your mouse 1 at least once first before you recharge them again. Next up, his second EX ability is Tectonic Shock, and it is his Shift E ability. It pretty much does the same thing as his E ability, except that the enemy is incapacitated after he or she lands, and this can be useful for lining up your other abilities or just putting them out of combat for even longer than the base E ability. Very nice. And finally, Raigon's ultimate ability on the F key is the Wrath of the Tiger. What the ability does is basically you charge up for a short while, and then you dash at an enemy, and if it hits the enemy, it deals some initial damage first, and then you proceed to deal consistent damage to all enemies within the large AoE for some time. The damage is split evenly among all enemies in the area, 6 damage at a time, and so while the AoE damage is nice, the burst damage potential isn't quite there once you have more than one enemy in it. Should you wish to end it early for any reason at all, like maybe all the enemies have already exited the area, you can just press F again to dash out in your chosen direction. While the ultimate ability is really fancy, I feel Raigon's energy is better spent on his R and EX abilities since they provide so much more utility or healing as compared to the ultimate ability. Though having said that, it can still be a very potent ability against a single enemy if they have exhausted their escape options and so they have to run out the AoE slowly. And so that's about it for Raigon's abilities. Now, we move on to his playstyle, strengths and weaknesses. Raigon's playstyle is a bit of a passive-aggressive playstyle. What he usually needs to do is to identify when and where he can jump in to unleash a string of attacks and burst the enemy down that way. Typically, you want to try to hang back a little bit and wait for a chance to use E on an enemy and follow it up with a spacebar onto them for some free damage. At this point, you have 2 choices depending on the enemy playstyle. Typically, you would want to do this combo a few times and see what sort of reaction do they usually give. Do they retaliate? Or maybe do they take a more defensive step? If they usually retaliate, then starting with Q is a good choice once you land, and if they have a wall behind them, following it up with a Dragon Palm with R is a good choice before you lay in on them with your mouse 1s and mouse 2s. Otherwise, if they typically try to just run and not fight, or perhaps use counter abilities, you can use your mouse 1s and mouse 2s on them as long as it is safe to do so. Like before, if they have a wall behind them, use R to knock them into it to continue damaging them. When you sense that you're about to be in danger though, use Q as you retreat. These are sort of the basic rules of playing Raigon. There will probably be more about how to play with him later in the video when we can get to his Battlerites, so just keep these in mind for now, as the sort of Raigon basics I call it. As with all melee champions, there's that fine balance of aggression and passiveness that you have to strike. Continually assess the danger levels and react accordingly. Don't worry if you fail a few times, you'll get there eventually with practice. On to his strengths and weaknesses, I think that one of Raigon's strengths is his ability to really punish an enemy that is close to a wall. If your enemy is stuck between you and a wall, he's going to be in for a bad time. With his R ability, coupled with his parry ability, he can keep an opponent pinned close to the wall for quite a while, especially if they've used up their escape cooldowns, and this strength of his becomes even more apparent when we get to his Battlerites later. Next up, another strength of his comes from his ability to control the enemies from a huge distance. His E ability has a very long range, longer than most of the abilities that ranged champions have even, and this really gives him the ability to choose his fights most of the time, which is a good thing to have as a melee champion. Finally, Raigon is also strong because of his fairly consistent self-sustain. Between his occasional mouse 2s and slicing winds from his EX mouse 1 ability, or reflecting attacks with his Chyill ability, Raigon can sustain himself for quite a decent amount of time if he is playing correctly, and by that I mean getting out of dangerous positions before it is too late and stuff like that. One of Raigon's weaknesses is his lack of a proper escape cooldown. While his spacebar ability is good as an escape ability, usually you want to use it as an initiation ability since it has such a high damage. So with that said, it's a bit of a balance between risk versus reward, and occasionally it might be the right play to save the spacebar ability as an escape. And this all depends on the enemy team composition, playstyle, and a few other factors, so it is probably better to just learn and get a feel for it. I will try to give some tips on this later on in the video. Moving on, another weakness of Raigon's is that he can be kited quite easily. Most of Raigon's damage comes from the burst damage from combos, especially if the enemy knows what to do to keep you away. Once they have managed that, it can be quite tough to get back in range and continue hitting the enemy as Raigon. And with that said, there are ways which I will get into later that might help alleviate this problem. And finally, I think that Raigon is a little bit weaker because of his weak ultimate. I think that the ultimate can be buffed a little bit, at least when it is used against multiple enemies. I think that the total damage done when used against multiple enemies can be increased a little bit. Maybe instead of hitting 6 every time, make it 7 or even 8 if there's more than one enemy in it. That way, it would make it at least a bit more on par with the case where it was used against just one enemy. If there's just one enemy in it, it can stay at 6 and it should still be fine, I think. The long channeling time to use the ultimate makes it pretty easy for enemies to interrupt it, and so I think increasing the damage is justified, and you won't feel as punished when using it against more than one enemy at least. And so, that's about it for his playstyle, strengths, and weaknesses. Now let us move on to Raigon's Battlerites options. Once again, you can pause the video to slowly read through every single Battlerites if you wish, before I go through my thoughts on his Battlerites, since it will take a long while for me to read it all out for you. And so pause now to read them all. Okay, now that you've read them all, let's continue. In the first tier, I think that all of the choices are all pretty good, with maybe Riposte coming in as my favorite one, even though all 3 choices are decent. The reason for this is that Riposte gives a little bit more flexibility to Raigon's Q ability, allowing him to stun and deal a bit of damage to enemies after using his parry ability. This is great for times when you want to cancel an enemy's counter or channeling ability, since it is countered as an AoE stun, or just apply pressure on enemies as you walk toward them with your parry ability up. Overall, a very useful Battlerites that fits in most matchups, I think. Pretty sweet. When you're against slippery ranged enemies, Aerial Strike could be pretty good since it will help you with closing the gap as well. Remember I mentioned earlier about how spacebar is one of your only escapes and how sometimes you might want to save it for escaping instead of using it to initiate? Well, with this Battlerites, you can initiate with your E ability just as well, and so you might be able to save the spacebar for escaping, or even chasing down an enemy if you don't need to escape. Overflowing power is also a pretty decent pick when you just need that little bit more sustainability. I suppose it also gives you a bit more ranged capabilities, even though the slicing winds aren't very long ranged at all. But I suppose ranged is still ranged, I guess. On to the second tier are some great choices again. Headlong Rush is a great Battlerites because I think that the increased range really helps Raigon to stick to his targets more, and furthermore, it also helps with initiating sometimes with your mouse 2 ability instead, especially in medium ranges, since your spacebar ability has a minimum jump range. Next up, Royal Descent is great if you want some extra damage from your spacebar ability. If you know you can initiate with it often and make full use of its damage, go ahead and pick it, I think. It should be very helpful with getting those central ops as well, since they don't move and the extra damage can help you to get the last hit. And finally, Duelist is good if you can reliably get enemies to hit your parries. If they are very vigilant and very rarely hit your parries, then maybe it might not be as helpful. The healing you get from it is very nice though, I would say. Overall, in this tier, Most of the time I pick Headlong Rush just because I like the feel and playstyle of it. In the third tier, I almost always pick Dragon Mastery. While Invigorate and Shockwave are interesting, I feel that Dragon Mastery is just so much better because of its chaining combo potential that it should almost always be picked. Chaining stun after stun on the enemy and weaving attacks in between those stuns is super devastating, so it is almost never wrong to pick Dragon Mastery. What's more, you can always recast it even if you don't stun an enemy, and so effectively, even if you just hit the enemy once with your R, you could potentially get an actual stun off with a second R cast, and this is still pretty worth it, I would say. I suppose if you want to switch it up a bit here and there sometimes, Invigorate is a good survival choice for more sustain, and the bonus damage from your E ability can be quite nice from Shockwave. But even after saying that, I would still recommend Dragon Mastery more than the other two. In the fourth tier, I think that the choices are quite good as well. I must say that the developers did a pretty good job giving Raigon a good variety of Battlerites since almost all of them are viable. As with Royal Descent in the second tier, if you are hitting most of your space bars, taking Hawk Dive might be good to help you stick to your target more after jumping onto them, so that's pretty good for offensive purposes. Resolve is also a good choice because extra energy is always helpful since you'll be using quite a lot of your Dragon Palm, which is your R ability, and your EX abilities as well, for those heals and incapacitates. Sword Dance is the only one that is a bit lackluster compared to the other two, I feel. While it is nice to have parry ready more often than not, it can sometimes be hard to even get in range of enemies to hit them with your mouse once to begin with, so it might not be that valuable. Hawk Dive and Resolve just helps a bit more, I think. And so for this tier, generally I would pick Resolve, unless I specifically want my spacebar to slow my enemies down. Finally, in the fifth and final tier, I think the power of the blade will be the go-to choice most of the time. Any healing is always good, and so even though the healing isn't crazy much, it is still pretty decent. The Tiger and the Dragon could work, and it could be worth it, especially if you picked Royal Descent and Hawk Dive earlier. However, do bear in mind that most of the time, your enemies would be far away from you by the time you jump, and so it is likely that enemies are out of range of your spacebar ability even, since the AoE of your ultimate is so big. Unless of course if you purposely jump out earlier before your ultimate even finishes. And so typically I just go with the power of the blade, since it is overall the safer pick. And so that's about it on Raigon's Battlerites. Now let us move on to some of my gameplay tips for playing Raigon, as well as some potential combos with him. My first tip to playing Raigon is to not be afraid of using those weapon charges. Just like Shifu, those weapon charges each add a static amount of bonus damage and healing, and so whether you have 1 charge or 3 charges when you need to use mouse 2 to catch up to an opponent, or just for a little bit of healing, just do it. There's no need to wait for it to stack up to 3 charges. Catching up to them with the mouse 2 is more important since at this point, you will be in range to mouse 1 them a few more times, letting you mouse 2 them again, using those charges that you've gained while using your mouse 1s on them. Very nice. Remember, earlier in the video, I mentioned something about saving your spacebar as an escape occasionally? Well, let me address it here now. There are a few rules or thumbs that you can follow, and it might help if you're unsure when to use the spacebar offensively or defensively. If you feel you're being constantly overwhelmed the moment you get in range of enemies, perhaps it might be good to save your spacebar for escaping. This is especially true if you have a support teammate, since you can afford to lose out on some burst damage and play the long game or something. Otherwise, if you really need the way to initiate, you could also consider initiating with your mouse 2 instead, or even with your E ability as well, if you picked up the Aerial Strike Battlerite in the first round. If using spacebar to initiate is still the only way, perhaps saving your Q for retreating, or even your R for retreating might be okay too sometimes, so don't worry about changing it up a little bit. Another tip I have for playing Raigon is to get used to using your EX and R abilities frequently, while constantly thinking about how to combo your abilities together smoothly. Since his ultimate is a bit lackluster, you'll mostly want to use his energy to stun enemies with R, incapacitate enemies with Shift E, and get some healing in with Shift Mouse 1 when you can. Only at times when you can afford it, do you use your ultimate to maybe try to quickly bring someone's health pool down. Having said that though, even though the ultimate is pretty weak at dealing damage, its ability to zone enemies is quite good, so perhaps you can use it to zone enemies away from the center and use it to take the orb that way. On to some combos with Raigon. A good combo to taking the orb is to jump right on top of it for 20 damage, follow it up with a mouse 1, a mouse 2 and then another mouse 1, and the reason for that is because with the recent buff to Raigon, he can cast the mouse 1 very quickly after he uses his mouse 2, and so that burst at the end should hopefully increase your chances of getting the orb. Next up, a neat little combo if your enemy is not backed up against the wall is to use R on an enemy, push them back that way, and they should be far away enough for you to use your spacebar on them for some little bit of damage. A neat little combo for 28 damage, I think. When you have Dragon Palm Mastery from your 3rd tier Battlerites, you can now unleash quite a bit of damage on an enemy that is between you and a wall. Use R to start with when you can and want to, and then proceed with a quick mouse tool onto him or her. If you think they can quickly jump away after the stun, quickly use R again to make sure that they don't. If they can't though, using an extra mouse 1 after your mouse 2 before using another R to stun them again can give you maximum damage output for the combo. After the second stun, of course continue to try to do as much damage with whatever else abilities you got ready at this point. Haha. Another combo you can do if you see an enemy that is far away who is very close to a wall is this. You can try to use E to begin with, wait for a short while, and then jump onto him with spacebar and quickly mouse 2 onto him or her, and use R to knock them back into the wall, before laying in on them even more with your mouse 1s and mouse 2s. This feels super awesome too, by the way. Well, combo training with Raigon feels super awesome in general. I think the developers did a very good job with the feel of his abilities because they all feel so punchy and man, it feels so good. So anyway, these are just some of the combos I like to use. There are many other ways of chaining them, and I suggest you try to explore with it and maybe try to find effective ways of chaining his abilities together as well, since it is impossible for me to list all of it down in this video anyways. After all, it is part of the fun of playing Raigon, to improvise combos on the fly as you're playing with him. About his teammates, I think Raigon pairs well with ranged teammates that can support or back him up, I would say. Teammates like Paloma or Pestilus to heal him, or even teammates like Jumong, Taya or Ashka who has those very long range capabilities are I think good teammates for Raigon. Raigon draws a lot of attention I feel, and so he benefits his teammates that way. While he's doing that, his longer range teammates help to damage enemies or heal him. So I would say those are some pretty deadly combinations. I think that Raigon doesn't pair well with melee champions because it might be hard for melee teammates to be able to create some space for Raigon to breathe when he needs to. Raigon heavily depends on a few abilities to do damage, and so while waiting for them to come off cooldown, he needs a little bit of space to do that. Not only that, having so many champions all in melee range at once makes it a bit harder for Raigon to do his job effectively, since everyone's just sort of getting in the way of each other. And so overall, I think Raigon is a super fun and awesome addition to the champion pool. I think he's a breath of fresh air to play because he has those flashy moves and it just feels super awesome when you can chain them together so smoothly, while causing loads of damage to your enemy of course. While he may not be the easiest champion to pick up, he's certainly not the hardest of melee champions to use, so if you're into learning how to play melee champions, I think Raigon's a great place to start. With the recent buff to him, I think he's in a very good spot as a champion, and he's definitely somewhere around my number 1 or number 2 champion for me, so I will definitely be playing him a lot. I'm still having fun playing with him even after 2 weeks, so I think he's good. Anyway, yeah, that's about it for my Raigon guide. I hope you found it useful. As I mentioned in my Shifu guide, Taya's guide was pushed back so that I could fit in this Raigon guide into my schedule, and so the next Battlerites champion guide will be on Taya. And I have also tallied up the polls on my Shifu guide, and it seems like an older guide will be up next after Taya's guide. Since I already have 2 guides lined up, there will be no poll in this video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe to the channel, like it, comment on it, share this video, and you can check out my other videos as well if you haven't already. Thank you very much for watching my video, and until next time guys, keep on gaming, stay chill, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.